I remember the way he closed the door. Not fast, not slow, just final. Like a man who had carried a weight for too many years, and knew that if he let even one word slip, it might crush him completely. I stood on that porch with the winter air cutting into my lungs, but the chill wasn't from the cold. It was from the look in his eyes. Because for a split second, just a heartbeat, when I said her name, he froze. His jaw trembled. His fingers twitched, and his gaze drifted, not at me, but toward something behind me, somewhere distant, somewhere heavy with memories he was trying desperately to bury. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. He wasn't refusing to talk because he didn't know. He was refusing because he knew too much. And whatever he knew, whatever secret he had locked away for decades, it wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked like old glass. "You don't want to open this. Not this one." Then he shut the door. And as I stood there, listening to the echo of that latch sliding into place, I felt something I hadn't felt since the beginning of this investigation. Not curiosity, not determination, but fear. Because if a man who had stared murder in the face for 30 years was this afraid to talk, then whatever truth was hiding behind that silence was darker, deeper, and more explosive than I ever imagined. And it was already starting to surface. Thanks for your time you always spend to watch our videos. We greatly value your support, so please share this video with your loved ones. Do us a favor and subscribe right away, regardless of where you are watching. Let's dive into the story of the Zodiac Killer, late 1960s, early 1970s. Part 2. Control him. They didn't fake the crimes. They didn't help the killer. But they did manipulate the narrative. They leaked certain details, suppressed others, turned a murderer into a myth. Because myths last longer. Myths distract. Myths generate headlines. Myths give the illusion of progress even when there is none. And someone from that old circle was still alive, still determined, and still feeding the legend. The box in Carl's closet. When Carl finally trusted me enough, he walked to a small hall closet and pulled out a metal lockbox covered in dust. He set it on the table between us. "This," he said, "is everything they didn't want the public to see." Inside was a stack of documents, photos, letter fragments, and an old reel recording. Some materials were stamped. "Suppressed. Do not release." "What's in here?" I asked. He swallowed. Proof the Zodiac case was mishandled beyond repair. But before I could take a deeper look, Carl grabbed my wrist. "Once you open this," he said, his voice breaking, "you're part of it too." The unexpected confession. As I sifted through the contents, Carl finally admitted the truth. He was the officer who took the unauthorized Polaroid. He was the one who captured that strange symbol. And he was the one ordered to destroy it. His hands shook as he said, "I kept it because I knew they were lying to us. I kept it because I believed someone inside wanted the Zodiac to slip through our fingers." I asked him the one question I feared the most. "Do you know who?" He nodded slowly. "I know exactly who." And then, just as he opened his mouth to say the name, a loud thud slammed against the cabin door. Carl froze. His eyes widened with fear. A second thud. Harder. Closer. More intentional. The lights flickered. Something moved outside the window. Carl whispered. "He found us." The man outside the cabin. The cabin door rattled again, hard enough that dust drifted from the ceiling beams. Carl's breath hitched. My pulse kicked into my throat. For a moment, all I could hear was the wind brushing through the pines, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving across the wooden porch. Slow, measured, deliberate. Someone was circling the cabin. I slid the metal lockbox closer to me and whispered, "Is it him? Is it the Zodiac?" Carl shook his head fiercely. No, the Zodiac's long dead. This is worse. Worse? How do you get worse than a serial killer standing outside? Carl didn't blink. It's the man who wanted him to stay alive. A shadow at the window. A dark silhouette passed across the side window. Broad shoulders, steady posture, no hesitation. Not a drifter. Not a burglar. Not someone lost in the woods. Someone with purpose. Someone who knew exactly where Carl lived, and why I had come here. I reached for my phone, no signal. Of course. Carl grabbed my wrist again, grip trembling but still strong. If he gets that box, the truth dies with it, he said. You can't let him take it. Another thud hammered the back door this time. The cabin wasn't being tested. It was being breached. The name finally spoken. The tension snapped inside Carl. He suddenly stood, pacing in small frantic lines, whispering fragments of a confession he'd held back for decades. You want the name? Fine. You deserve it. It's... He froze. Looked at the window. And for the first time, I saw genuine terror in a man who had seen the Zodiac case up close. He lowered his voice to a shaking whisper. Captain Raymond Adler. I blinked. Adler? But he ran the task force. And he sabotaged the task force, Carl snapped. He controlled the letters, the leaks, and the evidence flow. He amplified the killer's legend because it kept the funding coming and kept the attention off his own failures. He fed the myth, I whispered. He was the myth maker, Carl said. Another sound, this one metallic and sharp, as if someone was prying open the back lock with a tool. Carl's voice dropped. And I think he's the one who sent that new letter. The cover-up takes form. Everything clicked at once. Adler had access to evidence. Adler had motive to fabricate, exaggerate, or manipulate details. Adler was alive, retired, and with friends still inside the system. It wasn't the Zodiac writing anymore. It was the architect of the Zodiac's legend. And now he was here, outside a cabin in the woods, coming for the one thing that could expose him. I whispered urgently. Why target you now? Carl swallowed. Because after 50 years of silence, I finally talked. I reached out to someone. I told them I wasn't going to die with this secret. I stared at him. Who did you tell? He hesitated. You. A chill hit me like ice water. I hadn't realized the danger I'd inherited just by walking into this cabin. The break-in begins. Wood splintered at the back door. Carl moved fast, grabbing the lockbox and shoving it at me. You need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving you alone with him. You don't understand, Carl said sharply. He won't kill me. I'm leverage. But you. He looked at me with hollow, fearful eyes. You're the one thing he can't control. The front door shuddered again. A hinge snapped. Carl pushed me toward the small hall closet. There's a crawl space behind the coats. It leads out under the cabin. You can slip into the trees. And you. Where is the box? Carl didn't answer. I knew Adler was reaching for him, even without seeing it. The timber above me creaked sharply. Carl gasped. Then, a sudden slam. A body hitting a wall. My heart pounded against the soil. You think I won't kill you? Adler growled. I gripped the lockbox tight against my chest in the darkness. Without this box, the truth dies. Just like Adler wants. The escape route. I forced myself forward, crawling farther beneath the cabin until my hand brushed against an opening. Fresh air slipping through a break in the foundation. The exit. I slid toward it, inch by inch, careful not to disturb the floor above. But then, a sharp crack erupted overhead, followed by Carl shouting, "Run!" He knew. He knew I was escaping. Adler reacted instantly. His boots thundered toward the closet. The same closet I had climbed into minutes earlier. I scrambled faster, the dirt slipping beneath my elbows as I pulled myself toward the light. Behind me, the closet door was ripped open. Wood shattered. Fabric tore. And then I heard Adler snarl. "She's under the cabin." He knew. I launched myself out of the opening beneath the house as fast as my legs would allow, stumbling into the cold twilight air. But I didn't get far. A gunshot cracked through the trees. The bullet hit the ground inches from my foot. I froze, heart slamming. Adler stepped out of the cabin's back door, weapon raised, eyes locked directly onto me. "Don't run," he called out calmly. "You won't like how this ends." The man with the badge and the gun. The echo of the gunshot was still rolling across the lake when Adler stepped out from the cabin's back porch. Calm, steady, frighteningly sure of himself. The sunset behind him painted his silhouette in a bloody orange outline. But what chilled me wasn't the gun. It was the way he held it. Comfortably, casually, like a man who'd done this before. "Don't run," Adler said, leveling the barrel at my chest. "You won't like how this ends." My legs screamed to sprint. My instincts begged me to dive into the forest. But deep down, I knew something. You don't outrun a trained lawman in his own terrain. Especially not one who's been practicing control his entire career. I raised my hands slowly. "Ray," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't have to do this." "Oh, sweetheart," he answered, walking toward me with measured steps. "I really, really do." The mask comes off. He stopped a dozen paces away, close enough that I could see the aged lines on his face, the cold calculation in his eyes, and the twitch of impatience under his jaw. He looked like every retired cop you've ever seen, except for the emptiness behind his stare. "That box you stole from Carl," Adler said, "belongs to me." I tightened my grip on it behind my back, hidden from his view. "It belongs to the truth," I said. Adler smirked, an expression with no amusement behind it, just arrogance. "There is no truth without interpretation," he replied. "And interpretation is a resource I've managed exquisitely for half a century." He took one more step, one too close, one that revealed his true fear. "You're not going to expose me with a couple of dusty letters and suppressed reports," he said softly. "You don't have the context. You don't understand what we were doing. What I had to do." I swallowed. "And what was that?" His answer was a quiet dagger. "We kept order. The justification of a corrupt man." Adler lowered his weapon slightly, just enough to talk, not enough to trust. "You think the Zodiac was the only predator out there?" he asked. "He was just the loudest, the most theatrical, the one whose name sold papers and secured budgets." He paced slowly around me, like a wolf circling prey. "People needed to be afraid," he continued. "Fear keeps communities alert. Fear keeps departments funded. Fear turns incompetent investigations into legendary battles against an unstoppable monster." He paused behind me, close enough that I felt his breath, and when the real Zodiac stopped writing, a long exhale, I made sure the myth continued. I turned just enough to face him. "So all the letters after 1974. Mine," he said proudly. "All of them." My stomach knotted. "You exploited a serial killer's victims. You abused your badge. You lied to the whole country." Adler's face darkened. "No," he said, stepping close again. "I gave the country what it needed. A twist of the gun. I weighed my options. None were good. If I tried to run, Adler would shoot. If I charged him, he'd fire before I closed half the distance. If I dropped the lockbox, he'd kill me anyway. So I did the only thing that could keep him talking." "You created a monster," I said quietly, "just so you could play the hero." For the first time, the mask cracked. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. His fingers twitched on the trigger. "I spent 20 years chasing a ghost," he snapped. "And you think I don't deserve to shape the story? You think I haven't earned that right?" "Earned? No." He'd stolen that right. I kept pushing. "You weren't hunting the Zodiac," I whispered. You were protecting yourself. Adler stepped so close the barrel touched my sternum. One more word, he warned, and you won't leave this forest. My pulse hammered in my ears. But I wasn't done. Why kill Carl? I demanded. He was your partner. Adler's expression shifted, anger melting into something colder. He was a variable, he said. And variables ruin stories. The moment everything changed. Before he could press the trigger, before I could react, a shout exploded from behind him. Drop the weapon. Two voices. Two flashlights. Two sets of boots pounding through the leaves. Adler spun in shock. I dove sideways into the dirt, and suddenly the clearing was flooded with lights. Sheriff's deputies. The ones Carl had secretly called earlier. Adler raised his gun. A fatal mistake. A shot rang out. Then another. Then silence. I crawled to my knees, breath ragged, heart pounding, as Adler collapsed onto the forest floor, the man who kept the Zodiac myth alive, finally falling in the shadow of the lie he built. The deputies rushed past me, weapons still trained, shouting commands Adler would never hear. I looked down at him, his badge still clipped to his belt, his eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in 50 years, the monster behind the myth had a name. And justice, at long last, had caught up. The truth unravels. The forest was still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as deputies handcuffed Adler and led him away. I sank to my knees, clutching the lockbox to my chest like a lifeline. It felt heavier than ever. The weight of decades, decades of fear, deception, and lost lives, was pressed into that box of letters, photos, and suppressed evidence. Carl emerged from the shadows, bloodied but alive. He collapsed beside me, exhaling a breath he'd been holding for what felt like a lifetime. I thought it was over, he whispered, shaking. It's over, I said, though the words felt thin. For him, at least. The aftermath of truth. The investigation that followed was unprecedented. Adler's arrest triggered federal inquiries, internal audits, and news coverage that shook California to its core. Files were released, suppressed evidence was recovered, and for the first time, the Zodiac murders were seen in a new light, not as unsolvable terror, but as a crime manipulated by both a serial killer and the very system tasked with stopping him. For me, the work was far from done. I spent months combing through the documents in the lockbox, cross-referencing every letter, every cipher, and every piece of evidence. Patterns emerged, inconsistencies were resolved, and finally, the story of the Zodiac Killer could be told with clarity. No longer just horror, no longer just myth, no longer just fear. Now, there was truth, a lesson written in blood. One of the most chilling realizations was simple. Evil thrives when people look away. The Zodiac Killer terrorized communities for decades, but Adler's decades-long manipulation showed me that sometimes, the monster isn't only the one with a knife or gun, it's the one who bends the system to preserve power, feeding chaos for personal gain. We honor the victims by telling their stories fully, unflinchingly. We honor the heroes, the detectives, the journalists, the survivors, by never letting fear dictate our silence. Carl survived to testify. Families of the victims received answers they'd waited decades for. The city could finally breathe, knowing that a shadow manipulating terror for attention had been unmasked. And I realized something else, too. Courage isn't only about confronting the killer. Courage is about refusing to look away when truth is buried beneath decades of fear and lies. The final letters. With Adler exposed, the letters he had sent were finally studied, decoded, and contextualized. The ciphers, the taunts, the new Zodiac letters, they weren't the work of a new killer, they were the work of a man desperate to control history. Even in his arrogance, he had left a trail. Every detail, every mistake, every boast, all preserved in the lockbox, waiting for someone patient, someone persistent, someone willing to walk into the dark. And we found them. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had arrived. The heroes and heroines. It would be wrong to end this story without acknowledging those who truly fought. Carl Dayton, for risking everything to preserve the evidence. The deputies who acted quickly in the woods that night. The detectives who never gave up on fragments, even when public pressure and misinformation mounted. The families of the victims, whose grief never became complacency. And yes, even journalists, like me, who chased a ghost through forests, archives and nightmares, driven by a need to see the truth uncovered. We all played a role in holding a predator accountable. The final reflection. The Zodiac Killer left a mark that will never fully fade. But the myth, the manipulation, the decades of terror, they have been dismantled. We learned that monsters are not always who we expect. Sometimes, the most dangerous are the ones in plain sight, armed not with knives, but with power, influence, and the ability to distort the truth. The victims' stories are no longer lost. The heroes' actions are no longer unseen. And the lessons we take from this, about vigilance, courage, and justice, will echo for generations. Because, in the end, justice is not just about punishment. Justice is about truth. And truth, when pursued relentlessly, cannot be buried forever. Thanks for watching. For more of a true crime story, subscribe to the Famographic Show. Thanks for watching. For more of a true crime story, subscribe to Famographic Show.
The country controls it all characters. Besides, as I made it, experience and competences are going to continue.